ICANN accredited registrars are responsible for the provision of registrar services regardless of whether the services are performed by the registrar or a third party, such as a reseller. Registrar services is a defined term in the RAA. Registrar services means the services provided by a registrar in connection with a GTLD and includes contracting with registered name holders, collecting registration data about the registered name holders, and submitting registration information for entry in the registry database. Reseller is also a defined term in the RAA. A reseller is a person or entity that participates in a registrar's distribution channel for domain name registrations, A, pursuant to an agreement, arrangement, or understanding with the registrar, or B, with registrar's actual knowledge, provides some or all registrar services, including collecting registration data about registered name holders, submitting that data to the registrar, or facilitating the entry of the registration agreement between the registrar and the registered name holder. Registrars must enter into written agreements with each of their resellers that enable the registrar to comply with and perform all of the registrar's obligations under the RAA. Registrars must also ensure that their resellers, 1. Do not display the ICANN or ICANN accredited registrar logo or otherwise represent themselves as ICANN accredited. 2. Include all ICANN required notices and provisions in their registration agreements. And 3. Identify the sponsoring registrar or provide a means for identifying the sponsoring registrar, such as a link to the Internic Whois lookup service. Registrars must ensure that their resellers comply with any ICANN-adopted specification or policy that establishes a program for accreditation of the individuals or entities who provide proxy and privacy registration services. Reseller customers must be provided with a link to the ICANN webpage detailing registrant educational information, and resellers must publish on their websites or provide a link to the registrant's benefits and responsibilities specification. Registrars shall use commercially reasonable efforts to enforce compliance with the provisions of the agreement between the registrar and the reseller. Some examples of commercially reasonable efforts might include the following. 1. Including all of the reseller obligations in the agreement between your registrar and its resellers and attaching consequences for non-compliance. 2. Implementing monitoring processes whereby your registrar periodically looks at its resellers' websites to ensure compliance with certain RAA obligations, such as website posting requirements. And 3. Including annual reporting requirements in the agreement between your registrar and its resellers that would require resellers to provide evidence that they are in compliance with RAA obligations. Please note that this is not an exhaustive list. If a registrar learns that a reseller is causing the registrar to be in breach of any RAA provision, the registrar shall take reasonable steps to enforce its agreement with the reseller so as to cure and prevent further instances of non-compliance. We've talked a bit about termination of a registrar's accreditation, so let's take a closer look at how that might happen. ICANN may terminate a registrar's accreditation agreement under the specific circumstances set out under Section 5.5 of the RAA. Depending on the circumstances, the following may be possible grounds for termination: a material misrepresentation, material inaccuracy, or materially misleading statement by a registrar in its application for accreditation or accompanying materials. Conviction of a registrar or any of its directors or officers of a felony or other serious offense related to financial activities by a court of competent jurisdiction. Judgment by a court of competent jurisdiction that a registrar or any of its directors or officers committed fraud or breach of fiduciary duty, or is the subject of a judicial determination that ICANN reasonably deems as the substantive equivalent of these offenses. Discipline of a registrar for dishonesty, or the misuse of the funds of others by the government of its place of domicile. Failure of a registrar to cure a breach of its RAA within 21 calendar days after being provided notice of the breach by ICANN. Bankruptcy or insolvency of a registrar. Actions by a registrar that ICANN determines endanger the stability or operational integrity of the Internet after 3 days' notice of the determination, and failure by a registrar to abide by the ruling of a court or arbitrator requiring the registrar to take a specific action under the RAA. In the event ICANN determines it will terminate a registrar's accreditation agreement for one of the reasons just described, it generally must provide the registrar with a notice of the termination in writing at least 15 calendar days before the termination will become effective. Remember that in the case of a breach of the RAA, there is a 21 calendar day cure period before the 15 calendar day termination notice period would begin. There is an exception in the case of bankruptcy or insolvency. In those circumstances, ICANN may terminate the RAA immediately. Registrars who are the subject of a termination notice may accept the decision or challenge the decision directly with ICANN or through arbitration or the courts. After a termination of accreditation becomes final, ICANN notifies the affected registries and makes arrangements to transfer all GTLD names to another registrar.